Okay, so for today's video, we're going to be doing 5 overrated non-horror picks. Similar to before, we're just sticking to genre that is to every other genre besides horror. And we wanted to differentiate overrated between classics and classics that we don't love. With the classics, we had stipulations of before 1993. So the first thing is with overrated, anything is fair game. The second thing is overrated movies could be movies that we just generally don't like, but they could also be movies that we think are really good. We just don't think they're as good as the consensus. So, maybe there's a movie that people think is God's gift to mankind, and we just don't think it should be heralded as such. So there's a much wider spectrum for this that we were able to pick from. And so today we're changing things up. I'm going to get things started. And I'm starting with my honorable mention. This is completely more or less a throwaway, and I just wanted an excuse to say this. My number 6 is anything ever made by Wes Anderson. And I mention this because, at least from what I see, Wes Anderson is constantly on lists as being like a top 10 director of all time, or being like a top 10 most influential directors of our generation. And I just am not. I don't like anything he's done. I can't think of the closest thing to a movie that I liked was Moonrise Kingdom, and even that is kind of like, eh. Like I know there's a lot of stuff so like Grand Budapest Hotel, and I think it's Fantastic Mr. Fox are the two that constantly get referenced as like the some of the greatest cinema ever put out. Um, I just don't agree in the slightest. I get that the way he does his movies, it has to appeal to a certain type of person, and I'm just not that person. But my honorable mention is any movie that has ever been made by Wes Anderson. I don't really think he's that good of a director or like a visionary, whatever you wanna call it. I just wanted to start there.
It's actually really funny that you bring this up because I was just talking to some coworkers today about Wes Anderson, and they were both Wes Anderson fans, and I am completely on board with you in your assessment. Now, granted, I've only seen one of his movies, and that was more than enough. I have seen The Grand Budapest Hotel, and it was fine. I don't know, like maybe like a 3 out of 5, but n nothing that I liked about it was like Wes Anderson's style. And I feel like he's one of those directors that has a very, very distinct and unique style, and it's just not my thing. Like, I'm sure he puts in a lot of, creativity and hard work into his craft and, writing his movies, directing his movies. Like, clearly he puts a lot into it, but it's just not my thing. So I can respect his craft, but seems to me he's a little bit of a one-trick pony. All of his movies seem very similar. I could just be completely ignorant because I've only seen the one and just heard about the others. Maybe I need to check him out for myself. But I just from the one that I saw, and even most people will tell you that's one of the least Wes Anderson-y movies of Wes Anderson. And even then, I thought it was just way too much. Just the quirkiness, his style of humor, the way like he structures his, designs his characters and set pieces. It just feels I don't know, just feels distinctly Wes Anderson and just not something that I typically jive with. So I don't think I'll check out anything else in his filmography. Maybe at some point, can't say, but I am completely on board. I do think he's a very overrated director.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned about how you've only seen one movie because I feel like I should. I'm looking through his filmography right now. I've seen 5 of his movies, which I would agree with you. I think is 5 too many. So I guess that's the last thing I'll say about it. But I think you hit the nail on the head with everything you said.
Right. Maybe I'll change my mind if I do end up checking some of his others, but just not for me. So I did not have an honorable mention. I couldn't really think of a sixth movie that I felt that I wanted to talk about that I would really say is overrated, but I'll go right into my number 5. It's a movie that's a little bit more of a cult classic, to be honest. It's not really one that maybe has like as wide appeal now, but definitely the people that do love it rate it very high. Um, it is 1981's Escape from New York. So it needs to be said right off the bat, sort of like you were talking about with Wes Anderson. I know a lot of people are holding their breaths right now. I find Carpenter as a whole to be overrated as a director. And I know that we're not talking about horror right now. Escape from New York, I would not put into horror. It's like dystopian sci-fi action thriller or whatever. Um, but just quick little side rant about John Carpenter. All of his movies have a very similar and distinct style. I do love some of his movies like Halloween and The Thing, but just a lot of his other movies just have the same problems, or I have the same problems with them that I'm about to describe in Escape from New York. So, if you don't know Escape from New York, it is an early John Carpenter movie and it stars Kurt Russell, and it's basically set in this dystopian future, sort of near future. I think it's set in like 10 or something, 2000s, I don't know. And basically, crime has spiked in the US, and the government turned all of the island of Manhattan into one giant prison where the prisoners can just like free roam. So it's just like a crime ridden, anarchy dystopia. And the president of the United States, played by Donald Pleasance, who most people know as Dr. Loomis from Halloween, he crash lands in Manhattan and gets taken hostage by some of the prisoners there. So the government sends Kurt Russell's character, Snake Plissken, who is a prisoner seeking to um, basically get um, pardoned for his crimes if he goes in and extracts him out. So, like I said, I'm not a fan of Carpenter's style. Typically, like I said, I do like some of his others, but I think some of the biggest problems that I have with his directing style are on display here in this movie. For one, it even though it's 90 minutes, it feels twice as long as that. It feels like it should have been like it feels like it was a 45, 50 minute like Twilight Zone episode that got stretched over 90 minutes. So even though it's remarkably short, it just feels so long. And that's because Carpenter likes to have these really long and extended sequences with limited dialogue, and it'll just show you the city, the landscape, and it'll take like 20 minutes of just Kurt Russell walking through this landscape with the occasional prisoner, scurrying in the background as he walks through these sets, totally devoid of dialogue, totally really long, dragging on extended sequences. And it's just not my preferred method of storytelling. It didn't let me relate to the character at all. I do have to say I did like the universe. I did like the lore. Maybe there's something there. I know Lee Winnell, who I mentioned with Upgrade a couple weeks ago. He is one of my favorite directors, and he apparently is on tap to do a remake of this. So maybe a live action remake with Lee Winnell would do it better. But yeah, just so many trademarks of Carpenter style that I'm just not on board with. So Escape from New York, number 5.
So this one's interesting because I guess I half-heartedly disagree with you. Like I don't I so I I am a self-proclaimed lover of 80s action movies. And so of course I eventually watched this one once I got past some of the others. And first, don't get me wrong, Escape from LA is absolutely terrible. I don't think that they ever should have made a sequel. It came way too late, and it has so many other of its problems. But with Escape from New York, I guess maybe when I watched it, I was more lenient because, like you said, it has a really cool lore. And I personally felt like I was able to get really into the world to the point where I always thought that this would be really cool as like an HBO series or something like that. Not necessarily to follow Snake Plissken, but just to explore more of the lore of the world. Um, and it's interesting because I think that in a way, you're right. I have not personally liked John Carpenter's stuff when he hasn't done horror. However, there was just something about Escape from New York, and I guess also Big Trouble in Little China, as long as I'm mentioning that. But there's just something that made me like the movie. It's funny because I don't think I've rewatched it since watching it that first time. So that's why I'm saying I half-heartedly disagree because there wasn't enough there to become like one of my favorites that I rewatch when I feel like watching a fun movie. But there was enough to where I liked it when I watched it, but didn't love it. Also, Snake Plissken is just a really cool name, and I can't help but feel like the fact that he wears an eye patch and has like a very distinctive outfit. I know it was a really big Halloween costume. Like I feel like maybe this movie gets put on a higher pedestal because of Pliskin himself. Like he just it is more of like it's like a cultural icon kind of thing. That'd be my guess. But yeah, so that's why I just wanted to explain why I like half-heartedly disagree.
Yeah, and I think that is part of it. And you also sort of hit more of the nail on the head there with me because I'm not particularly a fan of 80s action movies. And I think this is almost like Carpenter. It's almost like as he was trying to transition from horror to non-horror, he was just really leaning into the tropes of this new genre. And I feel like in general, he tends to do that on purpose. And I feel like with this one, like the 80s, like hamminess and cheesiness is like on a whole other level, which he tends to do with a lot of his films, especially his non-horror films. Um, so he made the movie he wanted to make. It's definitely Carpenter style. I'm not going to take any of that away from him. It's just, like we talked about with Wes Anderson, it's just not really my preferred style. So I have to say that it's, in my opinion, quite overrated. Even though it is still a little bit of a cult classic.
Okay, yeah, no, that's perfectly fair. So my number five is 1976's Rocky. And I want to start by saying this is a good example of when we were laying out the criteria earlier, where it's not that we think the movie's bad. I do enjoy the first Rocky. However, I don't necessarily think it's as good as everybody else says it is. And I don't want it to sound like I have Rambo bias with the next thing I'm about to say. Sylvester Stallone has done many things in his time on this earth. The two things he's probably most known for are Rocky and Rambo. And by pretty much every metric, Rocky has just been better. It's been better received. If you do like a side by side comparison of just the first five Rockies and then there's only five Rambos. So you remove, I believe it removes the Creed trilogy. It did better in the box office. It did better in the reviews. Like if you just put them next to each other, Rocky is better by all the metrics. That's what I meant by that. And in my personal opinion, I disagree. I think that Rambo, especially the first one's better. I think it has a better franchise as it goes along. I think that as the Rocky movies go on, I'm going to stick with that whole cultural icon thing. I think it just became like a thing to go and see Rocky, especially like with Rocky 4 that does the parallel with the Cold War, and it was just the thing to everybody was very patriotic at the time. They wanted to root for the US against the Soviet Union, and so like I think that that has an aspect to it, but then going back to the first Rocky, which is the one that everybody, seems to universally agree is the best, although I guess with the new Creed trilogy it's up for debate. Although I haven't seen them, so you might be able to talk more on this. If I'm not mistaken, though, a lot of people really like the Creed movies, so I'll leave you to that in a second. But with the first Rocky, this could be a product of me just generally not liking boxing movies, but I feel like, in my personal opinion, I never really got into the story itself. Like I said, it's a good movie. It has a good story. It has a good beginning. It has a good ending. I get what it's going for. I get the tones and the symbolism and everything they're trying to say. It just didn't necessarily resonate with me as much as I feel like it resonated with everybody else. I mean, it's a very successful franchise, so clearly it did good. And I'm still trying not to say it's a bad movie. It's just, in my opinion, not like one of the greats as a lot of people say it is.
I like kind of agree with you in some aspects, but also kind of disagree with you in others. I only watched all the Rocky movies this year in March in preparation for Creed 3 because I really wanted to see that. So I watched them all. Overall, I did really love the franchise, but I will say, to your point, especially watching it now in the present for the first time, the first one especially, very dated, by modern standards, quite slow, very, small scale and not as, bombastic and flashy as some of the other ones get. Um, I still think it's an incredible story. I really, really loved the Rocky character, but to your point a bit, I think that's because of the franchise as a whole. I think if just this movie was made and there was no franchise, it probably actually pretty definitely would not be as well received or well remembered as it is now. Um, But yeah, I still give the first one like a 4 out of 5, I think is what I gave it. I still thought it was a great movie, definitely a great sports movie. Um, a really big hot take. I actually thought Rocky 2 was better than Rocky. And apparently that was like a huge taboo in the Rocky community, but I just watched them all for the first time now. So in a sense, I do agree with you. But in another sense, I know you didn't say it was a bad film, but I definitely think I'm much more positive on it than you are.
Yeah, that no, I agree with everything you said, and especially that last part where like I would from when you reviewed them and you kind of gave me your review, it also felt like you just generally enjoyed them more than I did. Real quick before we move on, do you like it feels like people really enjoy the new Creed trilogy. Would you concur with that? Like didn't Creed destroy it at the box office, especially at least the first one?
Right. Yes. Sorry, I meant to mention that.
No
Um,
worries.
yeah, no, people loved all three. I loved all three. I have all three are literally in my top five. Like I had Rocky 2, Rocky 1, and then the Creed trilogy. So I really liked them, and that seemed to be the consensus, both from a critical perspective and also from a financial perspective, because Creed 3 especially killed it at the box office this year.
Okay. If based on the so would you still recommend the Creed trilogy to somebody who did not originally like the first, I believe there's five Rockies, there might be six before Creed, but I think there's five.
There's six. There's Rocky 5, and then there's Rocky Balboa.
Okay, okay. I forgot about Balboa.
Um,
That's the one from like '06, right?
Yes, that was like the
Okay.
first legacy sequel that they had, and then they made Creed like another decade later.
Okay.
I would still recommend the Creed trilogy. I think they do have their own distinct feel, and they are quite different. They do obviously have similarities with like the boxing and training to be the best and whatnot, but I think like Adonis Creed, Michael B. Jordan's character, he's different in terms of like his motivations and his arc. And so I think the context is very different. And, if you were like me and, from a modern perspective, the first couple are pretty slow and dated. It definitely like modernizes it a bit. I wouldn't say they're better than the original two, but I still think they're great movies.
Okay. There you go. So for me and for anybody in the audience who may feel the same, still try the Creed trilogy.
Exactly. Highly recommend. Um, okay, so my number four is it is sort of a two for one, but the director intends it to be one movie. So from 2003 and 2004, it is Kill Bill Volumes 1 and 2. I am a huge Tarantino fan. I would say at least, all but a handful of Tarantino's movies, I'd give like at least a 4 out of 5 to. Some of his highest movies are some of my favorite movies of all time, like Pulp Fiction, Django Unchained, and Glorious Bastards. He's an incredible writer and director, no doubt about it, but he wears his influences on his sleeve. He does not hide and he does not water down what he is taking inspiration from because he loves to take what he loves in real life and work them into movies. And he is a huge fan of these 70s martial arts, like Hong Kong cinema. And I am very much not. So pretty much everyone knows Kill Bill. I mean, Uma Thurman is an assassin in this elite female assassin group, and this guy named Bill is their leader. And her husband is killed, and her baby, and she's put into a coma. And she wakes up 5 years later and learns that Bill betrayed her, so she's on a run for revenge to kill Bill. But it is very reminiscent of that 70s martial arts era, very stylized. It feels like a 70s Hong Kong, martial arts movie. It also feels very much like a stage play at parts. Um, Very over stylized, over dramatized, very unique way of doing the storytelling. Like I said, a lot of the set pieces make it feel like a play. Just that sort of very cheesy 70s martial arts feel. Not my thing. Kind of really takes me out of it when people are doing these really cheesy kung fu moves and like floating in the air and all this sort of stuff. It just kind of takes me out of the movie because it's not, it just seems not to jive with what he's going for in terms of making me believe that this is happening. Combine that with it being two parts for one story. So it did come out in two volumes, but Tarantino says he wrote it and intended it to be one movie. I think in parts it gets very long and boring. It definitely could be cut down to just one movie, and maybe I'd like it a lot more. But it's just something that I just couldn't quite click with it or get invested with it because I just kept getting thrown off with how over stylized it was and how reminiscent it was of that generation of movies that I just do not at all think of as fondly as Tarantino does. Um, so, like I said, love the director. He loves his influences. He loves what he loves. He made the movie he wanted to make. It's just not a movie that I like, and I see this as like people's like number one Tarantino movies or like top three, top five Tarantino movies, and I think I actually have this like literally at the bottom of my Tarantino ranking, very firmly so. But also it's a Tarantino ranking, so even the bottom third are still better than most directors' best. So, but yeah, not a fan of Kill Bill.
So this one's interesting because this is one of my mom's favorite movies. And so I've seen it a bunch, but that's because I've seen it from watching with him. Her. Um, the interesting thing is, as you will soon see, I have one of Quentin Tarantino's movies on this list, and I am not a Quentin Tarantino fan. There are movies he's done that I have enjoyed, but I definitely know I'm in the minority as far as him as a director. He's just never really been one of my favorites. And so, I agree with everything you said. But yeah, no, I don't necessarily have anything to add, especially because I don't like the director as much as you did. So I feel like me talking about the movie isn't going to give the same effect as what you just said. So I'm just going to say I agree with you and leave it there.
I mean, if you're watching through all of his filmography, it's definitely relevant to his filmography because he really loves these movies. And so, yeah, definitely, it feels like a movie Quentin made for Quentin. Maybe not for the fans. Maybe that was his intention. I don't know, but it felt like a movie he was making for himself. So good for him, but not my thing.
Just out of curiosity, do you prefer volume two over volume one, or just you don't care at all?
Honestly, I watched these not. I can't remember when I watched them last. I think it was before Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, so it's been a couple years, and they kind of just blended together because I watched them like in successive nights. So I honestly can't really remember a difference
No
between
worries.
one. I guess maybe volume two because there was a lot more action in that one. But volume one, I remember particularly being so slow. Like if they were combined into one movie, even if you cut it down a little bit, it would be a slog for most of it.
Okay. Well, I believe you. um So my number four is where I'm going to start to lose the audience, and it is 1999's Fight Club. Now, I have a friend who absolutely loves this movie, and I hadn't seen it in almost a decade. And so he was like, dude, you were young, you just didn't like it back then. You got to try it again. And so I tried it again, and I still didn't like it. I liked it more than the first time, but I still didn't like it, but this was like one of his favorite movies. So I was like, okay, what am I missing? So I did a bunch of research, found out it's based on a novel. And then I read that. And that's awesome. So I'm I this is an interesting one because it made me respect the movie more after reading the novel. And so I don't think it's bad. Like I'd probably give it maybe a 3.5 out of 5, which I know sounds terrible. I know a lot of people say this is like one of the best movies ever, regardless of genre. And so for me to give it a 3.5 out of 5 is probably just terrible to some people's ears. However, I highly recommend reading the book. I feel like in my personal opinion, I just think the book is better. I think that that's probably why I didn't like the movie. I think that maybe it was just the wrong medium because once I read the book, then I got it. Like everything made sense. Not that I don't mean like I knew what the movie was saying. It just didn't hit with me until reading the book. The best example I can give is kind of like how if you read Bram Stoker's Dracula, it's like this experience that you're or as you're reading, and it's that book is really hard to translate to movie. and get the same experience. So I'm gonna use that as the example and say the same thing for Fight Club. The book I just think is a better experience. And it's interesting because I did not know this until I did research into it. Fight Club apparently when it opened did terrible. And this is actually considered like a pseudo cult classic, quote unquote, because it became more popular over time, and I guess now is just considered one of the best movies ever. I was surprised. I thought I assumed it would have killed it when it first came out because of how much people talk about it. But yeah, so this one's an interesting one. I no longer think the movie's bad. I do like the movie, but I just like the novel so much better. And I also, like I keep saying, I feel like every list I see, Fight Club's on like the top 10 of literally like all time, and I don't agree with that.
Well, I think I just found what should have been my sixth on my list because I completely agree, and I even gave it like a 3 or 3.5 out of 5 when I first saw it. Yeah, I am a huge Fincher fan. He is probably definitely at least in my top three favorite working directors of all time. And yeah, I remember I've only seen this once. I am doing a rewatch of Fincher's movies in preparation for his new movie in November. So I've been slowly going through them. I have not rewatched Fight Club yet. I am curious how I feel about it now. But my first impression when I first watched it, it was in 2020, was yeah, just I didn't get it. Not from like a thematic perspective. I just didn't get the hype. It was fine. It was very fine. Like you said, it was just like 3.5, and I just didn't see how it like reignited this like reignited in the sense of you're right, it was like dead on arrival. And it just like reignited to this cult classic. I just didn't see why. I don't know. I honestly can't really remember it too much to be able to like specifically. I'll probably be more specific once I get to rewatch it in the next coming month or so. But yeah, just one I just did not get. Um, so I'm right there with you in the same boat. I have not read the book, but I typically see Fight Club in the top five, maybe top three in people's Fincher rankings, and I think it's like my fourth from the bottom or something. It's like in the bottom five, and that's a really huge hot take, especially like in the film like Twitter community.
All right. I wasn't sure if we were going to agree on that one. But I'm glad we did.
Yeah, like I said, huge Fincher fan, but definitely it's in his bottom five of his filmography for me. But I also just really love the top whatever 10 or so. So right there with you. Okay, so number three is a movie that would have been a hot take when this movie came out because it seemed like everyone was obsessed with it. But I've actually started to see more and more people sort of reevaluating it, being like, this movie actually wasn't as good as we had hyped it up to be. So from 2018, it's Bohemian Rhapsody. Um, the story of Freddie Mercury and the foundation and formation of Queen and sort of his life and everything. It really was like a huge deal. It made like a whole bunch of money, like hundreds of millions of dollars. I think it even got close to 1 billion, if I'm not mistaken. I could be way off there, but I'm pretty sure it just made like a whole bunch of money. There was a bunch of Oscar buzz. It got nominated for Best Picture. Freddie Mercury, or well, there you go. Rami Malek got nominated for Freddie Mercury. Um, but I've seen this movie a couple times now because my mom really loves it. And I just don't think A, it's as good as people thought it was, and B, it's not the best music biopic of the past couple of years because I think Rocket Man is significantly better. Bohemian Rhapsody, it's a very over sanitized version of the story. He did not live a PG-13 life, so it's kind of hard to tell a PG-13 movie. Um, it's hard to tell his story in a PG-13 movie, the story of Freddie Mercury, and a lot of the surviving members of Queen had like creative input, and it definitely feels like they made themselves look a lot better, and they really cleaned up his life a bit. And I just don't like when biopics do that. Rocket Man didn't do that. I'm gonna keep comparing it to Rocket Man because I love that. Um, I'm not particularly a big Rami Malek fan. I think he's fine. I'm not like obsessed with his acting. I'm not even a big Queen fan. Like, obviously, their hits are great, but like, I wasn't particularly interested in the subject matter. And I don't think it did a good job of making me particularly interested in the subject matter beyond getting to hear the songs. And the thing that really bothers me is how Rami Malek won that Oscar and was basically lip syncing. They did this thing where they like took his voice and like merged it with Freddie Mercury's, but he was basically lip syncing and they just like ADR'd it over him. I'm like, yeah, he did the dancing. Yeah, he replicated the moves at the concert, but like, such an integral part of that is the singing, and you lip synced through it. You didn't actually commit to the fullness of the part. Once again, comparing it to Rocket Man, Taron Egerton literally took voice lessons with Elton John and actually was live singing the whole time. Now they might have ADR'd some of it afterwards, but like he still was doing the singing for the audio. Freddie or Rami Malek was not. It was like this weird hybrid thing where he was basically lip syncing the whole time, but he still won the Oscar. And this was the same year Bradley Cooper was up for A Star Is Born, who also did his own singing, and it also is a better movie. So the fact that he won the Oscar just really peeved me off that year because I don't think that it was worth it at all. And I don't think this movie is best picture worthy, especially when it had much better music biopics to compete with. It wasn't competing with Rocket Man because Rocket Man was a year after. I just mean like movies of a couple years ago.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we touched on this in a previous video. Ironically, considering my history, I'm not really a musical person, and I know this isn't technically a musical, but it's like you said, it's musical biopic, and so my dad saw the hype surrounding this and wanted to watch it, so I did watch it with him. And it's funny because if it's ever on, he won't watch the movie. He'll just replay the ending. He just really likes the ending. I just wanted to put that out there. But generally speaking, I would just kind of give this a meh. I think I gave that rating before. Like it's not good, it's not bad, it's just kind of meh. Like I wasn't mad that I watched it, but I would never rewatch it. I haven't seen Rocket Man. I do think A Star Is Born is better. That's pretty much it. That's all I really have to add. I did not know that Rami did not. He was lip syncing. I did not know that. That's an interesting fact.
Yeah. Now, to the movie's credit, like you had said, I do think it ends on a very strong note and doesn't fizzle out there. It definitely leads towards something big and delivers. But a lot of it just goes to Rami Malek and his performance. And like the over sanitization of the story. But yeah, it was like some weird thing. Like they got like audio clips of Freddie Mercury and then like merged Rami Malek's voice with it. And then he was basically lip syncing while they were filming and they like ADR'd over the footage, the like weird hybridization of of the voices. I don't know. Either way, he wasn't actually singing it. So
Well, like you said, the ending that I've watched a million times because of my dad, I think that's done well. I don't know. I'm not like a big Queen fan, but from what I know about Freddie Mercury, at least that ending seems cool. He seems to do good. Like he seemed to put himself into the full character, I guess is the best way to put it. But yeah, so that's the. I'll just say I agree with you.
sounds good, makes things easy.
So my number three, I already know you're going to disagree with because of what you said a little bit earlier. So my number three is 1994's Pulp Fiction. Now, before you come
How
for me with
dare
the
you?
before you come for me with the torches. So whenever I look at lists, I personally always see Pulp Fiction not only at the top of Tarantino's like best work, but also this is another one that I constantly see on top 10 movies of all time. I don't think this movie's bad. I don't there's a lot of Tarantino stuff I don't like. This is not one of them. I really do enjoy this movie, but I don't think it's top 10 greatest movie of all time worthy. That's why I'm putting it here. I know we made that preference earlier with the criteria. I cannot stress that enough. I promise I don't hate this movie. I actually had a lot of fun when I watched it. I've only seen it once, maybe twice. But I just don't think it's one of the top 10 best movies of all time. And it's not a Pulp Fiction thing, it's a Tarantino thing. kind of, and you're gonna hate me for this comparison. Kind of like what you said with Wes Anderson. Tarantino has a style. It works for some people, it doesn't work for others. And the way he does his movies are just interesting. I'll say that. And it doesn't necessarily relate well to me personally. It's just not a style that I personally enjoy. I don't go and sit down and go, ooh, I'm going to watch a Tarantino film. It just doesn't happen. I have watched them because they are pieces of cinema and I know I need to because I am a cinephile, so I kind of like have to. But it's more of a Tarantino thing, not a Pulp Fiction thing. But I put this here because some people say it's like a top 5 movie of all time, and I just wholeheartedly disagree.
You're breaking my heart over here. I love Pulp Fiction so much. Um, yeah, it is my favorite Tarantino movie. It is my number one. It would not be in my top 10 of all time. It would probably be in like maybe like a top 50 of all time, maybe like top 30. It could potentially crack. I just think top to bottom, it's just an incredible movie. It is probably the most quotable movie of all time. I quote it regularly. It has so many iconic scenes that I feel like have stood the test of time. Um, I think the way that the plot is handled is incredible. Like the way the different stories are at different time periods, but it still makes sense. Like on paper, when you try to like map out the continuity, it seems like it wouldn't. But when you watch it, like the way it fills in the gaps, you really like get a sense of where everything's at. So I think he did a great job with that, with like structuring the story and the script. Um, yeah, I mean, obviously all the performances are great. Like this is Samuel L. Jackson, arguably his best role, and it's really the role that put him on the map. This was like his first like big starring role, and he's great in it. And I think, the big pitfall of movies like this that tell like four different stories is one always like, lags and is not as good as the others. But I think all four of these are great. And like I said, they work together just so well. Um, so yeah, just iconic moments, iconic quotes. Um, the way it just works together. It's just a great movie. And also it's like 2 hours and like 40 minutes. Anytime I've ever watched it, just flies by. I don't feel its length at all. I don't think it holds up. And even the parts that should be boring, what I think is so great about Tarantino is it's just two guys in a car driving around LA talking about cheeseburgers in France. And it's like one of the most interesting conversations you've ever heard. It's just the most random stuff ever. But he just has this knack for dialogue where it just is like, even some of his other work, like Reservoir Dogs, where they talk about whether or not to tip for like 15 minutes and you're like engaged and like on the edge of your seat, like listening to this conversation. Just he has a way with dialogue. And I think Pulp Fiction is some of his best. But yeah, that is easily my favorite Tarantino, I think.
So you are right. It has a lot of famous lines. It has a lot of famous scenes. Here's the one that just kind of did it for me. When Bruce Willis comes back to his apartment and then he's making all of that noise and then John Travolta comes out of the bathroom like, "Oh, someone's here." And then he gets shot. Like you cannot tell me that after all of those like the bathroom's like right there. How the heck did John not hear Bruce that entire time? I know there's other stuff in the movie, but that's the one that like sticks with me. It's like, okay, he didn't like that scene just makes zero sense to me. And yeah, I had to reference that one.
Never noticed that particular detail, but that didn't obviously it wasn't like notable enough for me to like remember that. But I get it.
No,
I get how
that's
it couldn't be for everyone. It's definitely one of the most Quentin Tarantino movies.
it's definitely this is another one that I know I have another friend. I guess now I know it's one of your favorite movies, but I have another friend who this is one of his favorites, and that's why I originally watched it. So I've now pissed off two of my friends in the same podcast.
For sure. Um, okay. My number two, I'm sure you probably could have thought coming, or it'll make a lot of sense. It's a movie that I feel like I could rag on for hours about why it's so overrated because everyone seems to love this. Um, just no beating around the bush. Thor Ragnarok from 2017. I'm gonna rant on it for a long time. I'm gonna try and cut it short.
This is what I
This is
thought
a
would be
mo-
number one.
This is not number one. I will explain why my number one's at number one. But number two, Thor Ragnarok. Um, Yeah, from the moment I watched this movie, and you were there in the theater with me back in 2017, from the moment I watched this movie, I did not like it. And to this day, out of, 20 whatever, 30 MCU projects, this is firmly in my bottom 10. And most people have that completely reversed and have it in their top 10, some even in their top 5, and it is something that I will never understand. I personally think this is where the MCU started to go downhill when it comes to the humor, because this movie is entirely tonally inconsistent. So you take the concept of Ragnarok. In the comic storyline, in actual Norse mythology, this is literally the apocalypse. This is like one of the darkest stories for them to tell. It is the destruction of your home, of thousands of people, and they turn it into one giant joke. And you can even see the difference in the logos. When this was first announced that in Comic-Con in 2013, the logo was all like dark and smoldering, and then Taika Waititi comes on board and it's like all bright and neon. And as soon as that logo changed, I knew something was up. But like I said, it's so tonally inconsistent because it tries to juggle this thing. It's adapting one of the darkest storylines of all time. And it just cuts to like lowbrow potty humor. It reduces Thor to having the IQ of like a 5-year old. You go back and you watch like Thor from like 2011 with like Kenneth Branagh's direction, and it's like Shakespearean and it's like high fantasy, and he's like, doth art thou, whatever. And yeah, he's like played to be like maybe he's not the sharpest tool in the shed, and he's naive from being like a sheltered prince his whole life, but he still has like that level of intelligence to speak the way he does. And he's got like a high sense of like honor and reverence and respect. And in this movie, he's just like a child. Like he has the IQ of a 5-year old, and he's like dumb as a doorknob. And they really just like, though the humor reaches like all time lows. And because this movie killed it at the box office and people liked it, they just leaned into this direction even further. And I think that this is honestly like one of the tipping points for the MCU. It's completely irreverent to the lore, not just of Thor, but to the MCU in general. Like Odin's death, the death of the Warriors 3, the lack of Lady Sif, like all of it. It's just treated so irreverently. I don't think Taika Waititi just annoys me as a person, and it's not because of this movie specifically, but I genuinely dislike Taika Waititi like as a person, not as a director, because he is incredibly annoying and he's incredibly conceited, where he thinks he's like this creative, quirky genius and he thinks he's like hilarious, and he's like not. And anyway, sorry, ranting. Um, but yes, I do not like this movie, and it is incredibly overrated because so many people have it so high. There's a reason it's not my number one, which I'll get to when I discuss my number one. But another reason why it's not is because I have started to see some people come around to maybe it's not great, especially after Thor: Love and Thunder, where they're like, okay, maybe Taika Waititi didn't do this quite right, and they're starting to turn on it a bit. But for a while at first, I mean, it killed it at the box office, killed it with people's MCU rankings. But from the very beginning, with you as my witness, I did not like this movie.
So it's funny because, like you just said from the very beginning, I want to say it immediately shot to the bottom of your rankings, like immediate, right after recency bias. And for me, it was like number two at the time. Now, as you know, I haven't watched an MCU movie since Endgame. I am one of those people who was just glad that it was over. I know it's not technically over, but the stuff that mattered's over. I was able to, I had my out after phase three. I got out. So I don't know if I'm the best person to talk about the state of the MCU, but I was already ready to jump ship before even Endgame. So take that as you will. Um, I haven't rewatched Ragnarok since I saw it once with you and then once again with another friend, and I don't think I've watched it since. So for all I know, I won't like it now. I know I liked it then. Like I said, I think I put it number two or number three. I think number two, at least for MCU, as far as that's concerned. But yeah, if I remember correctly, I literally only liked it because of Korg. Isn't that the name of the rock?
Played by Taika Waititi.
Yes. And so, well, it's funny that you say that you just, because he is a very annoying person. Like, he's fun in doses, but he always overstays his welcome. So I totally get what you're saying. And I can picture your face just being so like, and so that's
He's
just
just
funny
like
to me.
he's so like he thinks he's like the funniest person on the planet. And he also thinks like he's one of those people where it's like he's quirky, but it's like he's like trying too hard to be quirky. Like, look how quirky I am. Aren't I so quirky? Anyway, sorry. I just hate him.
No, you're good. So what you're saying is everything ever done by Taika Waititi is overrated. No, I'm kidding. Um,
I mean, to be fair, this and Love and Thunder are the only one of his movies I've seen. I didn't even see Jojo Rabbit. I've heard that one's pretty good. I might probably like that one, but that's also pretty toned down from his normal stuff.
I liked What We Do in the Shadows, and I don't think he did it, but he was the villain in Free Guy. But in that, he was just an annoying character. So I
He
can't
was
even like.
great as a side character in Green Lantern. Not really, but
I forgot he was in that movie. Um, so yeah, no, I mean, I don't. I know you hate this movie with a passion, and it's not like this is one of my favorite movies ever. So I guess I would say I half-heartedly agree. That'll be my final statement. Just because that 2017 version of me, I know really liked it, but it's been so long, maybe I'd hate it now. I just don't know.
sure.
So my number two is this is one I know. So there's been a theme with my list. It's movies that I consistently see on like top 10 rankings that I just don't think deserve to be there. And number two is, in my opinion, the most egregious of the offenders. And it is 1994's Forrest Gump. Now, I don't know what you think about Forrest Gump. I know that pretty much everybody I talk to loves this movie. They would die for this movie. If they were to be stranded on an island, they wouldn't choose to have Wilson. They would want this movie. That was a terrible joke. But the this is definitely one that I don't want to say I didn't get because I've watched enough videos on it to understand what they were going for, but I also the Robin Wright's character may be single-handedly one of my most hated characters in cinematic history. And I don't get how you can like a movie so much. And that's what I'm saying. People agree with me. Like whenever I look at it online, people agree that Jenny is a terrible human being. And so I don't get how a movie can be so highly viewed when people seem to have a consensus that one of the main characters is so terrible. Like it doesn't the overarching story, like there's some fun scenes, there's some fun sequences. I do enjoy the character interaction and the different experiences that Forrest has. But the overarching story, the stuff between Forrest and Jenny, it irks me. It just I've seen this movie two or three times. I know I watched it as a kid. I know I rewatched it more recently to see if it held up, like if I still didn't like it, and I might have watched it at some point in between, more like teen years. But I just Jenny alone makes me hate this movie. But also, I shouldn't say hate, sorry. Just dislike, because once again, I don't think it's a bad movie. But this irks me so much that some people even say this is the best movie of all time. How? Jenny is a terrible human being. How can you root for that person? And even if you're not rooting for that person, then how can you say it's the best movie ever? There's my rant. I'm sorry it wasn't as good as your Taika Waititi one.
No, I mean, I see what you're saying. I respect your opinion. I also politely disagree. This is like a classic movie for me. Like my family, it's like good family memories. Watching this, I mean, it's just like a classic, like American feeling movie where I feel like we watched it a lot around like 4th of July or like Memorial Day or something. But it's a movie like I have a lot of memories of me and my family all sitting down to watch. Um, I will say, I think it is very front heavy. I think once Forrest leaves Vietnam about halfway through the movie, the second half is definitely not as exciting and not as engaging as the first half. And I also agree Jenny is a piece of trash and that she is a terrible character. I have heard from because it's based on a book. I don't know if you knew it was based on a book or not.
I didn't.
Apparently it's supposed to be like she's supposed to be a bad character because it's like Forrest is like the epitome of like purity and being like a pure soul, and Jenny is supposed to like represent like how people will like take advantage of people like that. So like there's an explanation for why she's like that, but that's no excuse because she's absolutely insufferable, especially towards the end. Just every decision she makes just like makes me want to like, rip my hair out.
it,
But yeah, overall, I think it's a great movie. Um, Classic American movie. Like I said, it does have its flaws, as I've pointed out, but I would not say, well, I don't know. I'd be on the fence on saying whether it's overrated or not. People do put it as one of the greatest movies of all time. I think I could see a compelling case of it being like one of the like great American movies.
I was so focused on Jenny, I forgot to mention this, so I'm glad you did. I agree. It's a 2.5 hour movie, and I do think it overstays its welcome. So I'm glad you mentioned that one. And now that I've calmed down, I once again want to say I don't think this is a bad movie. I just say it's overrated because, like you said, and like I said earlier, a lot of people will say this is not only a top five movie of all time, but some people say it's the best movie of all time. I see it get put on so many lists, and I just don't agree with that. But I get what you're saying about how it's like a feel good American movie, and like you said, even if Jenny's supposed to be bad, I just screw Jenny. Like I don't know what else to say there on that one. Which is funny because um the actress who plays Jenny, Robin Wright, is in Princess Bride. And you know how much I love Princess
Right.
Bride. So you'd
Yep.
think that I'd be like, oh my God, it's Princess Buttercup. This is awesome. But she almost makes me hate Buttercup just because of how, and this is probably more of like a kudos to Robin Wright because that means she's playing the character well. She makes me hate Jenny so much that it almost makes me hate Buttercup.
I know her as Claire from House of Cards.
Ah, okay. Is she Kevin Spacey's wife?
She's one of the main characters, and yeah, she's his wife.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Number one. The reason this is my number one is because, you say Thor Ragnarok's overrated. You might get some pushback, but like overall, people are fine. This is a movie where you say it's overrated or you even criticize it remotely on something like Film Twitter, and you're gonna get eaten alive.
Oh no, I know what this is.
It's another comic book movie, and I need to stress, I rewatched it recently. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5. It does so many things right, but it's heralded as A, the greatest comic book movie of all time, and B, one of, if not the greatest movie of all time. So, The Dark Knight from 2008. Like I said, I do really like this movie. It is a 4.5 out of 5. It is a great movie from a filmmaking perspective, from a technical perspective. Christopher Nolan accomplished something incredible here. However, it does have issues. Even saying it has one issue seems to be heresy because people treat this like it's a perfect 5 out of 5, totally flawless, the golden standard of any comic book movie. People say it's the greatest comic book movie. I don't think this definitely wouldn't crack a top 5 favorite comic book movie. Maybe it'd be like a number 10 if I was doing a top 10, but no committal there. It would not crack a top 10 of all time for me at all. Um, so yeah, it is great, but fundamentally, I think this movie is where Nolan gets Batman wrong. I could go on a rant about this for a long time, but I will summarize it in this. To me, I understand there's different, aspects to the Batman character. There's different comic runs that emphasize different things. Me personally, what I like in the Batman character is that like insatiable drive and the personal stakes that Bruce Wayne has, where he's giving being Batman his all because it's personal. It's like he never caught the guy that killed his parents. So he has this like unquenchable thirst for justice that's personally driven and motivated. In this movie, one of the major plot points that even sets into motion the third installment is that Bruce Wayne wants to do anything to retire. Nolan overemphasizes Batman as a symbol and totally at the expense of Batman and Bruce Wayne having a personal stake in being Batman. And to the point where the major plot point is Bruce wanting to retire with Rachel and even being comfortable leaving being Batman, the idea of Batman in the hands of a DA like Harvey Dent. So to me, that just fundamentally misunderstands Batman's character and is not the kind of Batman character and the qualities of Batman that I personally like. Now, I understand people will always be like, oh, well, in this comic, this, and this comic, that, and that is whatever. Like I said, there's different aspects to the character. I just do not like that aspect of the character because I like that insatiable drive and quest for vengeance. While I mentioned Harvey Dent, I think he's great in this. I think Aaron Eckhart is great with this. I think Two-Face is incredibly rushed. I think he's great in the plot and the story and performance as Harvey Dent, but then he just becomes Two-Face for like 15 minutes and then dies. I think the way to do Two-Face personally is introduce him as Harvey Dent for a whole movie and then turn him into Two-Face the next movie. It just feels very rushed and it feels like his character wasn't truly given justice because, like I said, he turns into Two-Face for like 15 minutes, kills two people, dies. Also, the ending never made sense to me. Once again, it feeds into Batman wanting to retire at all costs, and he agrees to take the blame. I get it. You don't want to, symbols of justice and Harvey Dent, and it would destroy people's, thinking there's no hope in the world, whatever. Just blame it on the Joker. You literally just caught the Joker. Just say the Joker killed those people. They're mobsters. Just say the other mobsters killed them. I really don't think it would have been that hard, but Batman has to make this really dumb decision because he needs to retire. He wants to retire, which is the flaw with his character. It's not necessarily the movie's fault. I think they finished filming before Heath Ledger died, so it might actually be the movie's fault. But obviously, there's that big cliffhanger of the Joker's just hanging there, and there's no like resolution. Like by the end of the movie, it's like Batman physically catches him, and then there's no follow up. I believe he died after they'd finished filming because they were in like post production. So might be the movie's fault. If not, it's not the movie's fault, and it's just unfortunate that we never got to see that fully fulfilled. Um, but yeah, I think everything else is great. It's first movie Nolan put out in IMAX, so the shots look incredible. The cinematography is great. The story is pretty complicated, but I think it still works and is structured really well as a crime thriller because obviously Nolan wanted it to be like Heat. I think it does that really well as like a really good crime drama and crime thriller set in Gotham City. There's so much that this movie does right. I just think it has some problems. It's still a 4.5 out of 5. It is not a 5 out of 5. It's not flawless, and it is not the best comic book movie of all time. So that's my little Dark Knight rant, but it's something that I think about a lot because I see it a lot.
So I want to hit a couple of your points. The first one is this is something I actually see misconstrued a lot. Heath Ledger did finish filming Batman. He was actually filming another movie when he died. So it is the movie's fault. It's not Heath Ledger's fault.
Okay,
Just
that's
wanted
good
to
to
clear
know.
that one up. Then the second thing is, and this is interesting because I don't think I've heard this point argued before. The whole thing about him wanting to retire is actually very interesting. And yeah, I personally have not heard that perspective on it. So in the moment, I'm actually like I kind of agree with what you're saying in that instance, especially because so I'm a big Batman fan. I've read a crap ton of the comics, and there are a bunch of stories just off the top of my head where he literally chooses the cape and cowl over his significant other because of his, like you were talking about, like desire and like his will to be Batman to protect the city. And so that it's interesting. Yeah, that's a very solid point. I don't necessarily have a rebuttal to that one, so good on you for there. Um, and I know you kind of spoke on this when you're getting to your second point. So this is something that I feel like a lot of people will say with Dark Knight is the whole Two-Face is rushed. He's only done for 15 minutes. It kind of sucks. And to an extent, I agree with you. I think that like you said, Harvey should probably be done for a whole movie. Then we get Two-Face, because you want to enjoy the character. Now, like you said, with the symbolism stuff, the point is that it's essentially so like what you were talking about at the end, where he has to take the fall. So Two-Face, who is essentially supposed to be this great shining hope for Gotham, is essentially proving the Joker's point, and so he has to become Two-Face at the end, so that way deep down Batman knows that the Joker won, and then since the Joker can't win, that's why he then takes the fall. Especially because of all of the Joker paranoia, they already are hating on Batman. And so one, that's why he did it, but two, he also did it because then there couldn't be a third movie otherwise. So that's like it kind of speaks to your point. It kind of doesn't, but yeah, it's definitely, when I first watched it, I think I was like 10 when this movie came out, and so I was also like, Batman, why are you doing that? You could just say the mob. Like I can quote so, but that I understand that point as well, and I find it very interesting to defend this movie, and here's why. Whenever I go back to watch Dark Knight, I don't watch Dark Knight. I watch Batman Begins, Dark Knight, Dark Knight Rises. I literally block out 8+ hours of my day, and I always watch them all in succession. And in my personal opinion, the entire Dark Knight trilogy is amazing. That to me, currently, of all the stuff that is out, is the best quote unquote comic book movie. I know they're not a movie, but in my opinion, all three should be watched together. They should be watched. You should block out 8 hours and do it, and it should just be considered one movie. And it's interesting because of the three movies, I think you know this, Dark Knight is my third. Like I go Batman Begins, Dark Knight Rises, Dark Knight. And so it's also interesting because, like you said, I think I gave it a 4.5 out of 5. I might have given all of them 5 out of 5s, but I think I gave Dark Knight a 4.5 out of 5. And so, like I can't disagree with you. Is what I'm trying to get at here. But also because like I know I really like the Batman, like the Dark Knight trilogy, but also I like agree with some of the stuff you're saying as far as the movie itself. I do think, and this is going to sound really bad, if Heath Ledger had not died, I don't know if this movie would be heralded as much as it is. Not that it's a bad movie,
You're
but
totally right.
yeah, I really think that his death kind of cemented it, almost to the point where it, like, people couldn't badmouth it, or they would be badmouthing a dead person, and then it just kind of got stuck in that realm of, this is a great movie, we can't touch it. Like, I think there's some movies that kind of get put in that area where it's like everybody has to say it's good. We've been saying it's good for so long. I think you made this point about Citizen Kane, where it's like you can't badmouth Citizen Kane. It's the best movie ever, and it's just kind of sat in that, on that shelf for a while. So I will say that. Not that it's a bad movie, but sorry, not that this diminishes the movie at all, but I do think part of why it's heralded so much is because of Heath Ledger's death. So that's I don't know. I guess I will stick with the half-heartedly agree because I think all your points are valid, but also I love all three movies, but that doesn't necessarily work in this argument because you're just talking about the one movie, and I'm the one weirdo who thinks that they should all be the same movie. Like, yeah, that's I guess that's the end of my rant.
Yeah, and sort of just wrap that up, one other thought I had, like, Nolan specifically kinda has this trend where he's really into, like, ideas and themes, and he kinda, like, chooses to emphasize those in his scripts over, like, story, plot, and characters. And I think, like, that's kinda what makes The Dark Knight suffer for me here, because, like you said, like, all of the whole, like, Batman taking the blame and Harvey Dent, turning into Two-Face and dying feeds into, like, his themes about the Joker and trust in society and hope in society and whatnot. So that would just be another instance of that, in my opinion, where, like, Nolan is sort of sacrificing the character and, like, the plot narrative for the sake of, coming across with some sort of idea or theme.
Yeah, no, that's a very fair point. Um, I feel like there are a lot of like true comic Batman fans who also agree that like the entire trilogy is really great for Bruce Wayne, but it's not really like a true Batman quote unquote adaptation. Like a lot of people are still waiting for like the best Batman, so to speak. So like I've heard that a lot too, where it's everything is done great except the Batman part himself. I feel like is the one common negative review I hear about the whole trilogy itself.
We already got the perfect Batman and Benjamin Affleck.
I knew you were going to say that.
Anyway, that's a conversation for another day.
All right. Um, so my number one is this is no longer the on the list of top 10 greatest movies of all time. This was heralded when it came out. I don't think I've seen people reference it in almost like a couple years at the least. But when it came out, it was just like the bee's knees. And I'm looking at it now. It's got an 8 out of 10 on IMDb and an 80% on Rotten Tomatoes. So take that as you will. Anyway, this is 2015's The Revenant. Now, let me set the stage for you. I'm in high school. I've been told for months that The Revenant's the best movie ever made. You have to go see it. It's an experience. You're never going to want to see another movie afterwards. So I'm like, oh, okay, cool. I'll go on this is a great first date idea. I ask a girl out. We go to watch it. My God. First, of all of the movies that Leo could win his first Oscar for, this is not even Leonardo DiCaprio's best movie. Second, I get that it's a thing for some people, but this is over 2.5 hours, and I don't have exact stats on this. I feel like 2 hours is just staring at the scenery. It's just tree, water, groveling man, tree, water. Like it just go like once again, I get that some people are into this. I am not. And everybody who was talking about how visually amazing it is, they're right. It's awesome. I just felt like it overstayed its welcome. They do it a couple times, and then they do it some more, and then they hold more shots, and then all of a sudden it's been 20 minutes and you've just been staring at trees, and it didn't do it for me. Like it felt very much to me like almost like a 60s 70s kind of movie where it's extremely long and drawn out, but it just had better effects. And once again, I know that works for some people. Leo got his Oscar. This, it's rated very highly. Everybody loved it when it first came out. The beginning was awesome. The end was awesome. The drag I had to get through to get there. I mean, the date went terribly is the best way I can put it. She hated it. I hated it. There are very few. Normally, I'll watch a movie and I may just not like it. It's just not for me. And to an extent, I 100% agree. This is just not for me. But in my personal opinion, this is one of the very few movies that I actually hate. And I'm never going to rewatch this. There's never going to be a moment where I'm like, maybe I gave it a bad rap, because I don't think it's ever going to change. I just don't want to sit and stare at 2 hours of trees. That's just, it could be a hot take. I don't know what your thoughts were on this movie, but it's like, and also I'm the cinematography guy. I normally love when I can look past bad stories, bad writing, if the cinematography is awesome. I think this just went way too far to the point where it just pissed me off.
They're pretty trees that you get to look at for 2.5 hours. See, normally I'd be on the opposite, where I would agree with you, and I sort of alluded to this in Escape from New York. I normally hate it when movies like go like long time without dialogue and just like show like the setting and the scenery. But I do think part of it is the nature of this setting and scenery. I watched it back home. My parents had a big TV, 4K. Like it was like I was watching the 4K of it, so it just looked absolutely beautiful. And I don't know, it was just an immersive experience for me. I did really like this movie. I gave it like a 4.5 out of 5, believe it or not. I've only watched it the once, but like even that one time, it just completely blew me away. It just for me was more of an experience. And obviously, it's sort of thin on plot because there's like not a lot of dialogue for most of it, but I think the cinematography was incredible. and it just did it for me. It worked for me in that aspect. It's just such an incredible survival tale. I do say I don't I wouldn't say, let's see, how do I want to word this? I agree it's a weird one for Leo to win the Oscar for because I think he should have won before for other roles, but I don't think that necessarily makes him any less deserving for having won for this one, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's understandable.
Because I think what he does well in this movie from just a pure acting perspective is that there's not a lot of dialogue, there's not a lot of character interaction, so he has to like emote and convey to the audience, his thoughts and his feelings without directly saying his thoughts and feelings. And I think he does that quite well in this. And so that's why I would say that I still think it was like, in my opinion, an Oscar worthy performance. But yeah, I mean, I have not rewatched it in a while. It was a quarantine movie during COVID that I watched in 2020 because like that was the time I knocked off like so many movies that I had like backlogged that I needed to check out. Um, and this was one of them. And yeah, I just had a great time with it. Maybe it was just because we were in quarantine, so I just wanted to see what outside looked like again. Um, but yeah, no, I the cinematography was great. It's a triumphal survival story. Leo was great. So yeah, maybe over, I don't know. I don't typically see it as like greatest movie. Like you had said, like preface with that, but like this isn't one that I normally see people be like, oh, it's the greatest movie of all time and whatnot. So I don't think I would call it overrated, but I do think it's quite good. But I do understand why some people would definitely not like it.
A couple things. One, you are correct. Leonardo DiCaprio is just one of those actors who's great in everything he does. Even if it's a bad script, he's going to give it his best. So I guess me saying that isn't necessarily fair. The reason why I said it was overrated is one, when it came out, everybody was talking about it, but I guess maybe it was just a flash in the pan because, like we pointed out, I don't know if I've necessarily seen it referenced lately, but also the fact that it did get him the Oscar, and if I'm not mistaken, Leo has not gotten one since, right?
No, he has not. But there's an early buzz, like with every movie of his, though, that Killers of the Flower Moon. We'll give him that.
Okay, so yeah, I don't know if that should be a deciding factor, but considering how it's an Oscar performance and the it was the flash in the pan at the time, I just like this is forever stuck with me. This was the first time I started questioning when people recommended me stuff. There's been other movies since where the
Your trust was
recommendation.
broken.
Yes, that's like until this, if someone recommended me a movie, I was like, okay, I'll watch it. With this and a couple movies, like there have been some movies where the recommendation has been so overwhelming, I'm like, all right, let's do it. And then I am disappointed. If we ever do this for horror specific, I already know what number one's gonna be. But um this is just one that's kind of always stuck with me. And like you said, this isn't necessarily for everybody. Obviously, you really enjoyed it. I'm sure a lot of the audience may have enjoyed it. Maybe people forgot this movie existed. And also, it's ironic that he's like a mumble character starring in the movie with like the king of mumbles, Tom Hardy. I just realized that when you were talking about how he doesn't really get to speak.
Very true.
But yeah, this is just definitely, at least for me, the beginning's great, the ending's great, and the middle just drags so much for me pretty much after that bear. And it's funny because it was pitched to me as like Leonardo fights a bear. And I blame some of the people who pitched it to me because they said that it was like he fights a bear the entire time. So I'm thinking it's almost like a The Gray kind of thing where Liam Neeson's constantly going up against those wolves. But I don't know. Take that as you will. But I guess I was hyped up so much and just severely disappointed. And yeah, I guess that's all I really should say about that one.
Makes perfect sense. So there you go. 10, or I guess 11, because you had an honorable mention. 11 overrated movies.
Thanks for being here and hope everybody enjoyed.